I'm super excited that you've elected to join us on a Friday afternoon on the downhill run of probably what is a very long week after everyone's got back from their holiday festivities. So thank you for granting us this time. My name is Jenny Ricks, and I'll just stop screen sharing so you can see me. So my name is Jenny Ricks. I'm the Interim Director for Regional Development Australia here in the Darling Downs and Southwest region. I have also on the line, I'd introduce you to Tim, my admin support. He is doing a fabulous job of letting you all in and running things behind the scenes. And we'll introduce a little bit more about his role as we go through this session today. Strap in because it's a fairly long session. The last one that we did yesterday morning took us about an hour and 40 minutes. So it is recorded though. So if you do have commitments and have to leave, rest assured that this is recording will be sent out to you along with all of the PowerPoints and the associated information, fact sheets, etc., etc. So welcome aboard. We've got a chat function operational, so please feel free to chat as we go if anything pops up. Tim will be monitoring that, and we will have a question and answer session at the end. So save up your questions. We'll look forward to chatting through those at the end. If you can leave any project-specific questions to a one-on-one meeting, you know, I'm more than happy to meet with you to chat through your project if you think it's in a little bit more detail and sort of varies a bit from the actual BBRF guidelines. So without further ado, let me share my screen again. So we'll flick now through to the slides, and we'll race through this webinar. So welcome. The BBRF, I'll refer to it as, is the Building Better Regions Fund. It's one of our signature grants that's rolled out at a federal level. Regional Development Australia is charged with promoting that, making sure that as a region, we're putting our hand up and getting our share, or if not the lion's share, of that funding. So, you know, our job is to help you to be successful in getting as much of that federal government money into our region as possible. What we hope to cover today is the application criteria and some of those key elements for funding of your project. A lot of you will be familiar with the program from previous rounds. We're now in round 6, so we'll specifically outline what's different from previous rounds to this particular one. Give you some guidance on developing a strong application, and then picking up on some of the best practices and tips and hints that we've gleaned along the way and through previous rounds. We'll share some of our tips and hints, and time permitting, have that general Q&A session. So just a bit of a disclaimer, this particular grant is highly oversubscribed. There's no guarantees that even if you follow the tips and hints that we've given you today, that your project will be funded. In fact, only about 30% of the applications made to this particular grant are actually funded. So it's really important, and given that it's so highly competitive, that you and your application shine head and shoulders above the rest and really differentiate yourself from the others. So hopefully today we can give you some tips and hints to give you a better chance. The other thing to note is that which projects that do or don't get funded are not within the control of Regional Development Australia itself. They are vetted and approved by an independent party, and they actually cross over to a ministerial panel for the final decisions. In fact, RDA, they won't necessarily talk to us about individual projects, and there's been feedback sessions in the past which we've attended, but only on the invite of the actual grant applicant. So we're not included in the loop unless you ask us to be. So please keep that in mind. So these tips and hints we've gleaned from previous feedback sessions or chatting to applicants who've had feedback, or in fact looking at the successful applications in the past and trying to see what really put them a cut above the rest. So, so without further ado, we'll move on to explain who then is Regional Development Australia, Darling Downs and Southwest. And just so that everybody knows, this invite has actually been sent out nationally through our Regional Development Australia network. There's actually 54 RDAs across Australia. So we may have participants that come from a little further afield than our part of Queensland. So we welcome you here today. And I'll try to cover off on where you too can find the information and the resources that we're talking about today as we go through. So what are we and who and what do we do? So, so this is our geographical footprint. We look after 10 local government areas. You can see there from Toowoomba in the east, all the way out to the South Australian border here, and down to the New South Wales border in the south. So we have lots of the border regions within our jurisdiction. There are 7 state parliamentarians that cover this part of Queensland, along with 2 federal members. And it's actually 23% of Queensland. So it's a large chunk of Queensland. And I like to remind the Victorians that it's about the size of Victoria. So yeah, so it's a big patch, and we spend a lot of time in our car. Our charter is that we have, although we're funded federally, we have a committee of local leaders. They volunteer for the job to help, I guess, bring a regional perspective to the 3 levels of government. So our role is really to liaise and make connections between local, state and federal governments, trying to facilitate economic development outcomes for our region. So things like attracting investment, local procurement and jobs. We also are there to help, as I'm doing today, roll out, policies, grants, programs, research that is happening at a federal level, and make sure that our region is represented and getting their fair share of that, along with listening to our businesses and councils and industry groups, and feeding back to the Commonwealth where we think barriers are for economic development, but also what's working well and where we can be further supported. So we come up with sort of, I guess, a regional flavour to all the things that are coming down the pipe from the feds, and then try and connect it up and make it come to life with the local, state, industry groups, community groups, and try and bring it all together so that we can make our region shine. So our three overarching priorities for the Darling Downs and Southwest, and this is different from RDA to RDA. So for those of you who've come a little further afield than Darling Downs and Southwest, your local Regional Development Australia office will have, and committee will have potentially different priorities. But for our region, it's around improving access to funding, hence me being here today, and trying to help all of you with your fantastic ideas to get them across the line. Secondly, to coordinate and progress key regional projects. So even if funding's received, sometimes it's about helping people to progress those by making connections and introducing them to potential suppliers or particular people in government to get approvals across the line and expedite things. And as I mentioned before, communicating to and from federal government. So there is a monthly teleconference where we escalate local issues to our minister. Her name is Nola Marino, and she's quite a pocket rocket. She is very much champions regional Australia, and the issues that we raise, she then disseminates through to her ministerial colleagues and makes sure that we're heard and that those things get actioned. And we have seen that feedback flowing through in terms of different policies over the course of the years. Springs to mind things like some of the farm worker visas and things like that that have come out recently, which were flagged during COVID for our particular region as a serious impediment for our agricultural workforce. So that's a little bit of background. Also, just to give you an idea, we look after a population of 272,000 according to the census last year, and you can see there the land area. This data actually comes from ID Profile, and for those of you from Darling Downs and Southwest, each of your local government council areas have all collaborated to co-fund, along with RDA, access to ID Profile. This is a wealth of data, and we'll go into it in a little bit more detail as we go through. So if you've ever asked the question, where does all my rates go? Some of it, a small proportion of it, will be coming through so that you have access to this particular data, that you're able to slice and dice and glean insights to be able to feed into your grant applications and make them so much stronger. You'll hear me say many times through this webinar that data is your friend, and this is where you can get it. So please keep this in mind. You can access that simply by going through to ID Profile, and you'll have access to your particular local government area, or in fact RDA, Darling Downs and Southwest, if you're looking to cover multiple local government areas. Alrighty, so not all RDAs have access to this. I just might mention for our participants who've come from further afield, most do, but some don't. So please go through to your local RDA and ask them if they have this. If they don't, all is not lost. All of the local government areas should have, the councils should have access to this, and you'll be on the lookout and trying to track down an economic development officer in your local council who should be able to help you and will have access to this exact same data. So it might be a roundabout way, but it's still out there. You might just need to access it through different channels. Okay, so we have community information and also economic information as well, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But you can see kind of some of the information already that gets spat out of this particular site, including our GRP, the local jobs, the number of employed residents, things like that. All of this is useful information for you in your grant writing. So let's move on to our topic of choice after a bit of a preamble. This is the Building Better Regions Fund Round 6 overview. Look, it's a massive program. There's $250 million that is going to be rolled out as part of this round. It is in two streams. One is around infrastructure projects and another one is around community investments. And those projects are what they're looking for, and where they want the money spent is where projects provide economic and social benefits to regional and remote areas. Most, but not all, of the successful applicants will be based in regional and remote areas. Sometimes there may be providers that are providing services, their home, if you like, or their head office might be in a metropolitan area, but certainly the benefits of that project need to be delivered out in the regional and remote areas, and be delivering those benefits out there. So I'll go now into the difference between the infrastructure stream and the community investment stream. The investment stream, infrastructure stream is really about bricks and mortar. So it's around constructing something, whether that's like a building, for example, or a shed, for example. The community stream is more about the strategic planning, leadership, events in our community that's there to help build that, you know, the social fabric, but also deliver economic benefits. We've had questions come up from community groups saying, well, I'm a community group, I should probably apply through the community investments stream, but it's actually, you know, that they're building, for example, the cricket club's building a sporting shed. Well, in that instance, they would be better off going through the infrastructure stream because they're constructing something, even though they are a community organisation. So, you know, keep that in mind as to which stream your project fits into. As I mentioned before, this is round 6 of a very, very big program. It's built into the budget to spend $1.38 billion investing into community-driven projects. And it's there to create jobs, drive economic growth, and build stronger regional and remote communities. Now, I've included this slide on purpose because that's straight from the horse's mouth. So your project needs to reflect those outcomes and have some strong wording and arguments around that, as I said, to stand out from the crowd. As I mentioned before, it's an open, it's very competitive, and it's merit-based. And the program is for local government bodies, incorporated not-for-profit organisations, and non-distributing cooperatives. So this is not for the for-profit sector. So private businesses, for example, that are looking to make a profit from what they deliver are not eligible for this program. That said, they can partner with a lead applicant. So local government, for example, might be the lead applicant, and then they're coming in behind to help deliver those services. But it needs to be the council or the community group that needs to put the application forward as a not-for-profit. As I mentioned before, there's a ministerial panel that makes the decisions for the funding, and they've got a completely independent external contractor that actually goes through and vets and shortlists, I guess, the applications. Just reinforcing, RDA doesn't have anything to do with the decision process, but we're here to help you get you across the line. So the 6th round of BBRF was announced in the 21-22 budget by the federal government. Grant funding is available from between $5,000 all the way through to a maximum amount of $10 million, which is a lot of zeros on the end there. It's important to note that the projects must be completed by the 31st of December 2024. So there is a time frame that you can apply. There's a time frame as to when you can start, and there's also a time frame around when the project needs to finish. In terms of the grant amount and the application period, for infrastructure grants, they start at $20,000 up to $10 million. And the grant is there to cover 50% or more of eligible project costs. And I'll go into the or more part in the slides that are coming, but at a minimum, they are there to cover 50% of eligible project costs. For the community investment grants, they range from $5,000 through to $1 million, and again are there to cover 50% or more of eligible project costs. So the applicants need to have some cash or some funding coming from elsewhere to be able to provide matched funds for this particular grant. The application period opened on the 13th of December, and it closes at 4 p.m. Queensland time on Thursday, the 10th of February. So if you're on the site navigating around, they will mention 5 p.m. on Thursday, the 10th of February, but taking into account daylight savings time, that is 4 p.m. Queensland time. They're very strict about the cutoffs. There are absolutely no exceptions made. They won't care if we forgot about daylight saving time or if your computer crashed. It's either in or it's not in. So I would recommend getting your application in well before the cutoff date. Sometimes there's a mad rush on the government websites to get the applications in, and even that sort of traffic, everyone trying to submit at the same time can slow things down. So please put in your diary a deadline well and truly before that Thursday, the 10th. And we're here to help you. So if you need our help, if you have an application for a review, if you need some data or a letter of support, please also get that through to us ASAP, because we'll get a number of more than a number, we'll get a lot of requests. So we want to make sure that we've got the time to get those in by the end of January, the 31st of January, turn them around and get them back to you so that you're able to include those in your application. So a couple of dates there, 31st of January for RDA's additional information or reports, and the 4 p.m. Thursday, the 10th of February although I'm sure you'll be diarising a couple of days earlier. So who is eligible to apply? We sort of hinted at it just before, but to be eligible, applicants must be the organisation with the overall responsibility to deliver the project and have an ABN, and as mentioned, be an incorporated not-for-profit. And you can demonstrate that by having ACNC registration as a charity organisation, a state or territory incorporated association status, or documents or articles demonstrating not-for-profit character of the organisation. So these might be some of the documents that you would attach to your application to prove that you're a not-for-profit, that you're an Australian local government agency or a non-distributing cooperative. Now, this particular slide I've put in there just to reinforce that the private sector can partner with those lead organisations, but you've really got to reinforce that it's the lead organisation and the community that's going to be the main beneficiary of these funds. So it's not, you know, it's not there to deliver profit to, you know, a local contractor or builder or, you know, that sort of thing. So we obviously need to use builders, but that it needs to be for the benefit of the wider community and the lead organisation in that instance. Now, if you've listened this far through my webinar and you've gone, hang on a minute, but I'm a for-profit organisation, I'm not sure I want to hang on for another hour or so listening to Jenny babble on, let me assure you there's plenty of grants out there. In fact, I've only just started as the interim director here at RDA, and probably the single most surprising thing that has struck me in the 34 days that I've been here is that there are so many grants out there. It is a whole industry in itself, and you can go through to our webpage to be able to look at all of those. We've actually got a whole tab on our webpage dedicated to funding grants of all different shapes and varieties, whether it's coming from local, state, federal government, philanthropists. So please go in there and dig deeply into that tab. And we've got BBRF information on there as well. There's a stack of them, and the next slide kind of helps to demonstrate that. This is actually a document that was built collaboratively between the state and federal governments. Yes, they do collaborate and play nicely from time to time, and this is a fantastic example of that. So this is your innovation journey as an organisation, from startup or even research prior to startup through to the launch of your organisation through to scaling up. And you can see above that journey line, that above the line there is ample state government funded grants to help invigorate your organisation and get it through this journey. And below this journey, below the line, is all of the federally based information areas and grants that are available. So, you know, if your organisation is on this journey, there's plenty out there. This is actually the back of that particular document, and it gives you, you know, all of the contact details, websites, etc., for each of those tiles that were on the previous slide. So where you start as an innovator, an entrepreneur, all the way to starting and growing your business, through to, you know, even exporting, if you liked, and marketing into government and private sector. So there's plenty of places, and plenty of assistance and grants out there to help build your business. But let's get back to why we're here, which is the Building Better Regions Fund. What's different is in this round is that there's more money on the table. So round 5 was 200 million. This round is 250 million, which will be funded across both streams. There's not a specific breakdown between which stream gets how much money. It really depends on the volume and the quality of the applications as to how that 250 million is spread and distributed across those streams. One thing that does differ from round 5 is that they're particularly interested in the sustainability factor, if you like. So they're interested in projects that use recycled, repurposed materials, that they've considered better waste management, opportunities for local procurement, labour and services. If you recall, and if you're involved in this webinar, last year, round 5 had 100 million dedicated purely to tourism, and the tourism industry post-COVID. Well, this is, I guess they've taken tourism out and they've inserted, you know, waste and sustainability and local procurement. So you really do need to emphasise, even if your project isn't to do with waste or repurposed or recycled materials, but you really need to try and weave that in there somewhere, because that will pique their interest and make sure that it's aligned with the flavour, if you like, of this current round. And the projects, as I mentioned before, need to be completed by the 31st of December 2024. So depending on your project, that might that deadline might count you in or count you out. As I mentioned before, there's 2 streams. The infrastructure stream is involving construction of new infrastructure or the upgrade or extension of existing infrastructure that provide economic and social benefits to regional and remote areas. You might think I'm labouring a bit on the wording here, but these are straight from the guidelines and you really need to stick to them. So we've had questions, for example, around we've got an old historic building and we want to renovate it. Well, that's probably not going to fit into this particular grant program. There's others out there that it might do, but not this particular one, because this is about building or construction of new infrastructure or the upgrade or extension of existing infrastructure. So, you know, they're looking at it, gutting it, they're going to build a great big new wing on it, and, you know, it needs to be significant infrastructure, not a coat of paint is kind of what I'm saying. Community investment stream is around funding community development activities, including new or expanded local events. So again, of note here is the wording new or expanded local events. So if you're on the line and you've applied previously to previous grant rounds and you've been given funding for a particular event, if you put your event in exactly the same format as your successful application, then it's going to be immediately ineligible, because they want to see that it has been expanded somehow. So doing the same thing again in exactly the same format will not get you across the line. So you've got to thread through where it's new or expanded if you are running that same event and are requesting funding. It's also there for the community investments around strategic regional planning and leadership and capability activities. So we'll go into both of those streams in quite some detail. So hold on, we'll get there shortly. So let's dive a bit deeper into the infrastructure projects stream. Again, it needs to provide economic and social benefits to regional and remote areas. Probably sick of me saying that now, but we're getting there. The projects can be construction of new or upgrade, as I mentioned before, but it only supports investment-ready projects. So you need to be ready to go. It needs to be able to be implemented within 12 weeks of the green light. Grant funding will be up to 50 to 75% of eligible project costs, which is the or more that I talked about earlier. So your location determines the percentage of the grant funding that you receive. And you also need to prove that your co-funding is confirmed. So here's an example of one of the upgrades that have occurred through the infrastructure project scheme. As I mentioned before, between 20,000 up to 10 million, investment ready and ready to commence within 12 weeks of a grant agreement being struck with the Commonwealth. Now, you must not have commenced construction. So if you've started digging your foundations already and have paid a couple of contractors, that is not going to bode well in applying for this particular grant. So, you know, you need to have not started it yet. And as I mentioned, new, upgrade of existing, extension of existing, or replacement of infrastructure for a significant increase in benefit. So again, the wording around that is really important, and you need to reflect that in your application. And applicants may only spend the grant and co-funding on eligible activities directly related to the project. So that's their way of saying, look, you can't roll it over. If there's money left over, you can't roll it over into the next project if it comes under budget. And it's the same for the community investments stream as well. All right, so in order to prove that your project is investment ready, they will ask you to be able to provide an authority for the land or from the infrastructure owner to undertake that project on that particular site. So if the project is on council land, for example, then you'll want to have a letter from council saying that they're supportive of you building your building there. That all funding contributions from all sources have been confirmed, that you've got your regulatory or development approvals submitted and or obtained. So it mightn't be that you've got your DA approval yet, but it's in train, and you'll again need to provide supporting evidence of that. And that your project designs and costings have been finalised. I will make mention of this because it's come up in a couple of inquiries that we've had already in this particular round. What organisations are finding is that due to COVID and the issues around supply lines, that our project costs are escalating unprecedentedly. Construction costs are definitely more than they were even 12 months ago. So you'll need to make sure and touch base, if you've been planning this project for quite some time, that the funding amount that you're seeking for the construction, that amount is still in the ballpark, from whoever provided that quote or that plan. We would advise that you build in a healthy contingency into your costings. You know, 20% is not unreasonable in the current environment and the way costs are going up, but please don't take that as gospel. Please get that directly from your builder or the like. And you can make mention in your application that you have built in a healthy contingency. That will actually be viewed quite favourably, because it means you're switched on and you know that the costs are escalating, and that you are planning to absolutely see the project through, rain, hail or shine. So, but make mention that there is a contingency percentage in there that's budgeted for, so that that they're aware that you've thought the ramifications of that through and have accounted for it. All right, so the community investment scheme. So this is, as I mentioned before, new or expanded local events, strategic plans or leadership and capability strengthening activities. And your project needs to, as I mentioned before, deliver those economic and social benefits to regional or remote. Same as the infrastructure, the funding's up to 50 to 75% depending on where you are located. Although there's one, and this is fantastic for our smaller community organisations and smaller projects, is that if total grant amount is equal to or less than $20,000, the grant funding can be up to 100% of the eligible project costs. So this is really, really handy for our smaller projects. And what we find is that, you know, a lot of community or organisations will specifically go underneath that $20,000, or maybe break a project up into parts. For this year, we're going to, you know, get 17, and next year we'll get 15, so that they can stay and get the 100% of the eligible project costs. So keep that threshold in mind, because it does have a big impact on your co-funding. And if you don't have the money, then keeping it below that $20,000 might be a good way for you guys to go. That's just reinforcing the point that I've just made, and a great example of where we had a theatre production out in Griffith that was funded through this particular through round 5 of the BBRF. As I mentioned before, applicants can only spend grant and co-funding on eligible activities directly related to their project. So just as I mentioned with the infrastructure, it can't be rolled over into other projects down the track. You really need to be able to acquit it within the actual project, whether that be a new or expanded local event, development of a strategic regional plan, or leadership and capability strengthening activities. And these in particular also, you know, some of these can be quite attractive to some of our progress associations or local chambers of commerce, organisations like that can do some planning on behalf of the entire town that they look after, or that they want to build leadership amongst their board or committee members, so that they're there for the long run, and that, you know, the team comes together and that they're looking after their volunteers. So let me just talk a little bit about some of the examples of the community investment stream and some of the local events. So things like art and culture events, theatre productions, Indigenous cultural events, community and public events like festivals and field days and memorial events, events that would attract new businesses or economic activities, such as hosting a conference to enable growth in a particular industry sector, or address obstacles in accessing particular markets. There might be community and sporting events, or an interstate sports carnival, or events that attract tourists and visitors to a particular region. So they are thought starters, they're just examples, but projects along those lines have been funded in the past, and I'm sure will be funded again. So if your project is sort of along those lines, then that's a good green light in the right direction, a good step in the right direction. Some examples of the strategic planning are around the regional skills audit. So this might be a bit of a workforce plan around where we might have gaps in our workforce, for example, or research projects to support regional development plans. It might be a strategic planning workshop, across your organisation, or bringing different organisations together to collaborate, or collecting socioeconomic information. So it might be, that we want different migrant and refugee organisations to kind of pool their intel and come up with a report, for example, on sharing information about what they've got and what the needs are in those migrant refugee communities, for example. And finally, some examples of regional leadership and capability. So these might be things like leadership courses, participation or community building measures for youth, or participation activities to improve local business and industry leadership and capability. So again, very attractive to community-run organisations, or local progress chambers of commerce that are trying to help our region to thrive. All right, so the matching funds question, and where does the 50% cutoff start and stop, and where does the 75% start and stop? Look, there is in the guidelines a little map tool that you can go through. You can hyperlink through to this little mapping tool, but we've done it for Darling Downs and Southwest. So for those of you who come a little bit further afield than Darling Downs and Southwest, please use the mapping tool to see how remote you are. So this is a measure of remoteness. In our particular region, remote or very remote is classified as the following shires. So Baloo, Quilpie, Merway, Peru, Maranoa and Balonne. Local government areas are eligible for up to 75% of the total eligible costs. Southern Downs, Western Downs, Gundy and Toowoomba are not so remote. So in those local government areas, it's up to 50% of total eligible project costs. As I mentioned before, there's a mapping tool. BBRF is absolutely designed to benefit regions outside of major capital cities. But that said, sometimes there are providers who might have head offices there, but it's absolutely meant, the flow-on effects are meant for regional and remote communities. All right. This slide's on here to say, well, where can the rest of the funds come from? So they might be sitting in your bank account right this moment as we speak, but you may have other funding sources, including state, territory or local government grants. But please note, if you've got a grant that's from the Commonwealth government already, from the funds that you think, oh, I might be able to squeeze a bit more out of the federal government, they specifically exclude that. So the total Commonwealth funding from the project, including the BBRF grant, still can't exceed those 50 and 75% cutoffs, depending on your remoteness. There are exceptional circumstances, and I just want to make really, really clear up front that these are exceptionally rare as hen's teeth, needle in a haystack, all of those metaphors. And because BBRF is so competitive, you know, you've got to be really, really strong to get an exceptional circumstance for exemption for a cash contribution across the line. That said, you know, it is a possibility. So there are exceptional circumstances, and those might include, but are not limited to, drought or disaster declaration, the limited financial capacity of a local council, maybe the impact of industry decline, or a significant change in population or community demographics. And applicants need to really strongly demonstrate how those exceptional circumstances prevent them from meeting the cash contribution requirement. And the ministerial panel will actually consider requests for co-funding exemptions first, and if it's not approved, then the application becomes immediately ineligible, and you don't pass go and you don't go through for further consideration. So there are exceptional circumstances, but they are rare. And keep in the back of your mind that this is a competitive process. I think at the end of the day, the rationale behind this and the cash contribution component is, if the government is handing out, you know, quite significant sums, they want to make sure that those organisations that are delivering, that they're partnering with, are going to be there for the duration. They want to know that they're financially stable and that they're going to see the project through. And rightly so, if you're, you know, up to $10 million, you would want to make sure that your $10 million isn't just going to get something half built because they run out of money. So and you know, that flows through. So I think that's the rationale there. All right. Sorry, I've got a bit of a tickle in my throat, so I'm drinking water and tea. Now, this is where we get into the nitty-gritties of how it's assessed. So there's actually 4 criterion. If you get across the line for eligibility, the next thing they look at are these 4 criteria. The first is around economic benefit of your project to the region, and the second is social benefits to the region. And both of these are worth 15 points out of a total of 40 points. So you can see, if you do the math, those 2 alone are 75% of the assessment. So very heavily weighted, and your application will need to reinforce the economic and social benefits, or it has no possibility of getting across the line, no matter how well you argue criterion 3 and criterion 4, which are around capacity and capability and resources to deliver the project. So again, the strength and the confidence that you can argue to the assessors that your project will be seen through to finality. And then fourthly, that you actually need the money. So it's a little bit contradictory, isn't it? Assessment criterion 3 and 4, because you're saying, well, you know, we've got the money and we're strong enough to deliver, but equally, we need your money, federal government, to get across the line. So you're kind of arguing both ways with criteria 3 and criteria 4. Now, please note that you need a score of at least 60% against each of those assessment criteria to get across the line. So you need at least, you know, 3 out of 5 in assessment criteria 4. You might have argued really, really strongly about economic benefits and you might have got 14 out of 15. But if you get 2 out of 4 for the impact of the funding on your project, it won't get across the line. So, you know, obviously criteria 1 and 2 are really heavily weighted, but don't also forget about the other 2, because you need to get at least 60% on each of those to have a application that'll progress through for full consideration. This echoes the previous slide, except that I just wanted to highlight in this yellow sphere down below that the amount of detail and supporting evidence needs to be proportionate with the project's size and complexity, which kind of makes sense. Like if you're putting in for $10,000 versus $10 million, you're not going to have the same depth of application. But if you're applying for a significant amount of money, you know, saddle up, because you're going to need to provide fairly detailed plans, costings, risk-benefit analysis, things like that, to really shore up your application. Look, here are some thought starters on, you know, how do you show economic benefits. So in your application, you might make mention of a couple of these and some other ideas that you have. These are meant to be thought starters. So things like increasing the number and value of jobs, number of new businesses, new goods and services, opportunities for growth. You're going to use local suppliers and goods. The sustainable work practices that we talked about as being the flavour. The waste and sustainability stuff is the flavour of this particular round. That it increases efficiency of transport systems, and that there's Indigenous participation. So they might be some of the things, not all, but some of the things that might help you to argue economic benefits. Essentially, you need to meet the needs of the regional community and broader economic benefits during and beyond the funding. So they will want to see economic activity, productivity, and outcomes as a consequence of your project. And these are some of and the previous slide explains some of the detail and ideas, thought starters around that. We've got more information to share with you on this and more data that can help support you there. So if we just park that, stay tuned for our next instalment on economic modelling and the like, and the data that you can get your hands on through RDA. Social benefits. So again, some thought starters around this will be it makes your region more attractive place to live. fills a gap in the community, provides community connections and social inclusion. Maybe it supports, protects local heritage and culture, might increase volunteering or address disadvantage. They are looking specifically for that it's meeting the needs of your regional community, and again, that it has social benefits that flow on during and beyond the funding. So, you know, they'll be looking for regional amenity, community connection and inclusion, opportunities for collaboration, learning, you know, knowledge creation, that kind of thing. The sort of the lines that you can use around social benefit. Now, the guidelines go into quite a lot of detail around these 4 criterion. So please read them, reread them, you know, paraphrase them when you're putting your grant application together, because these are the key words that will prick the assessor's ear and help you to stand out and shine above the myriad of applications that they're going to be swamped with. Using their own words will pique their interest. So how do you show capacity, capability and the resources to deliver, which is that assessment criteria number 3. So things like your track record managing similar projects, you know, the access to the partners or people with the right skills and experience to be able to deliver, readiness to commence, you know, you've got all your ducks in a row with the authority to use the land, you know, technologies in place, you've got the project plan and the ways to manage and monitor it, that you'll operate and maintain the infrastructure and the benefits beyond completion of the project. And please note that if your project is still in the planning or concept stage, that it's not likely to be competitive, because they want to make sure that it's going to be started within 12 weeks and finished by the end of 2024. If you think your project is going to be a little longer than that and you need to do a bit more planning, look, don't despair. These, you know, there's regular rounds of BBRF. We're up to round 6 currently, so there will be further rounds that you can apply for, and so a bit more planning might put you in good stead for the next round. And we have at RDA conversations all throughout the 12 months of the year around Building Better Regions Fund. And in fact, that's what we prefer, because we can talk through things, connect you up with people at different levels of government or different suppliers, to try and make sure that you've had those discussions, that you've got names and people you can call on for letters of support well in advance. So I do encourage you, if you're not ready yet, then please don't think all is lost, because there'll be further grounds and we can help you in the meantime to get a really strong application ready for future rounds. All right, so again, this is, you know, pretty much straight from the guidelines, but, you know, think about how you're going to track and record that you've got a track record delivering, that you're ready to go, that you've got the planning, you've thought things through, including the mitigation of the COVID pandemic, be that health risks, or as I mentioned before, contingency for blowouts in construction costs and the like that might be, you know, from the situation the world finds itself in, or how you will operate and maintain the infrastructure into the future. How do you show the impact of the funding? So remember, this is like the flip side. In criterion 3, you're saying, you know, how strong you are and, you know, you're ready to go and the project won't fail because you've got all this experience and the cash in the bank to co-fund. Well, this is the flip side, saying, but we really do still need your money. So some of the things that you can put in around that, again, some thought starters here are around community engagement and collaboration plans, the total investment, including additional cash contribution, and in-kind support. So some other grants, so here's a big tip. Some other grants, you're able to put your contribution, your co-funding, as a portion of in-kind support, particularly things like volunteer hours, for example, or donations from the public are going to provide in-kind support, and that's part of your matched funds. For Building Better Regions Fund, you still need the cash in the bank or promised to you in writing from another source. So the dollars can't be mitigated for the co-funded portion. However, in criterion 4, in-kind support is looked at really favourably. So if those things are still relevant, don't discount them. Still put in that you've got volunteers coming in, or that you've got, I don't know, food or building supply donations. That's still in-kind support is still relevant, but it's an added plus. It's the cream on top. So you still need to justify that you've got the co-funding dollars required. How the project increases investment and partnerships, that will the project proceed without the grant? So address the elephant in the room. Like, if we don't get your money, it's not going to happen in this format. It's going to have to be, scaled down, or the time is going to blow out. Please, sir, we really do need the money. And also explain, if you've already received Commonwealth funding, why you need additional funding. That funding's quarantined for this particular project, which is quite separate to the one we're talking about in this grant application, and making that really clear that it's distinct pools of money. This slide kind of goes through that in more detail, and again, read the grant guidelines, because that will give you lots of tips and hints. And please use the same words as much as you can in your application to explain it away. Look, what we've noticed when over the last 5 rounds, in terms of the successful versus the unsuccessful projects, we've tried to sort of capture here. The stronger applications, which tend to get across the line, clearly argue these things: that there's some measurable improvement, the project is really well defined, that there's meaningful and authentic support for the project, that there's value for money, so that the money invested is got a good return, that it's shovel ready, as I mentioned before, ready to go within 12 weeks, we're ready to roll. And then also that there's some strategic alignment. Now, you can argue that around alignment to current federal priorities, but also state and local government priorities as well. Now, there's strategic plans available through your local government, through your councils, or through state. You can get on and research it through online. We do at RDA, if you go through our website, you will see the local government strategic plans for each of the council areas on our website. So if your particular council, for example, has within their strategic plan that they're really focused on, let's say, waste and recycling, and your project is also about waste and recycling, then you can say, and here there's strategic alignment at local government level, state, federal, and find references that will tie all of that together, and let them know that their money is kind of heading in the same direction as where they're also spending their money and hoping to make a difference. So these are kind of the key principles that we see flow through successful projects versus, you know, some of the weaker proposals that are put forward where the benefits are unclear. They might be lacking key documents. The support is fairly generic, so the letters of support are just, you know, kind of cut and paste, and they don't seem authentic. The budgets are incomplete. Potentially there's obstacles to proceed that the assessors think might pop up and that you haven't addressed. Or lastly, that the project's self-serving. As I mentioned, they're really particular that this is for local government, not for profit. So if they're thinking that you're benefiting, you know, you're going to profit from this somehow, then and there's not flow-on effects through to the community or, you know, your organisation for the long term, then it's not going to be viewed favourably. Right. What time is it now? 4 o'clock, 4:10, 4:11 on a Friday afternoon. I hope you're still with me. We should be really winding down and finishing the rest of this this webinar with a wine, I think. But let me launch into the detail around data and evidence at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. You guys are you're really strong if you're still on the line. So I take my hats off you, but we're going to launch into data and evidence and how important it is to build it in. Data is your friend. The numbers are your friend. So let's see how we can use some of that and some of the tools the RDA has got to strengthen your application. Here's a really good example. We actually stole this from Tasmania's RDA, so I won't take credit for it. But the first paragraph is quite well worded and read independently. It sounds quite good. It talks about this being an exciting project. It's strategically located in the centre of our community and has strong local support and emphatic endorsement from all key stakeholders and those intrinsic to the success of this worthy venture. So, you know, you read it by itself, it sounds, gee, that sounds like a pretty fantastic project. There's support coming and everyone's endorsed it and we've got some really good stakeholders on board. It's really worthy. But if you want to shine and stand out head and shoulders above everybody else that's going to be putting in applications for this really highly competitive grant, you know, some numbers are your friend. So here's this top paragraph reworded with some more numbers, more quantitative data in there. So the building of a men's shed in Goodtown is supported by the local RSL, Rotary Club and the local council. Goodtown has a median age of 55 years, 30% higher than the state median average, and 16% of households are older couples without children, compared to 11% across the entire Good region. As older residents are the most likely to use and benefit from a men's shed, Goodtown is in a prime location. So the green paragraph you can see has numbers in it. It's a lot more meatier and meaningful than kind of, now you read the top paragraph, it's a little bit fluffy. So please, data and evidence is really important to weave through your arguments that you're putting together to justify those economic, social benefits. Where can you get the data? Right, so for those of you from Darling Downs and Southwest, you're really lucky because you have access to heaps of data. And you can thank your local governments, your local councils for helping to co-fund this along with the RDA, Darling Downs and Southwest. It costs a lot of money to provide detailed information through ID profile, and you guys have got access to it. So if you've ever asked where your ratepayers' money goes, a small percentage of it goes to this, but it's really so that you can have some numbers, some qualitative data to make your grant applications stronger, so that more money comes to our region, and so that our region benefits from the economic and development aspects and activity of that. And then we have as a region the flow-on effects. So this is where your local government council, your council has invested, if you like. They've put some money up front so that you can use this tool for more money to come in, and for our regions to be better placed in the long term as a result. So we've got ID profile links there through for Boulogne, Baloo, Gundy, Marinoa, Peru, etc., Quilpie, all the different local government areas. And then we've got some umbrella cuts of the data as well for the whole of our RDA region across all of those 10 councils. And then we've also cut it separately for the Southwest Rock councils. So the 6 councils out west who really collaborate frequently on these sorts of grants, because they need their next door neighbours, and the flow-on effects across local government areas are quite obvious out to the west. You also can get access online, and we'll need to surf around and find them, to Queensland regional reports, council reports. I mentioned, state and federal websites and the like, where you can get your hands on some data. But I do speak really highly of ID profile. There's a mountain of data there. Let me I'll go to the previous. So I just hyperlink through and give you a little bit of a taste of what you can find. Tim's put those hyperlinks in for us. Thanks, Tim. You're a champion. It worked. Technology is usually the bane of my existence, but Tim's made it work for me today. Thanks, Tim. You can see here, when you hyperlink through, there's a couple of tabs: a red community profile tab, a green economic profile tab. Now, if you're wanting to find some information to argue economic benefits, you go through to the economic profile, the green tab. Some of the social benefits and demographic information is found on this red community tab. And you can see there that's on the home page that you saw in the earlier PowerPoint presentation, where it pulls up our population, etc. And on this left-hand panel, you can go through and surf through a whole heap of different reports. So, how old are we? You can see there's more reports on different brackets of age groups and things like that. So think about that men's shed example. They could tell that there's a certain number in a particular age bracket, who we are, what our ethnicity is, the languages spoken at home. So your project might be for migrants or refugees. You can kind of pick through that data and find out the ethnicity and the languages spoken at home. Disability, for example, is in there, that need for assistance. What we do, so how we're employed, full-time, part-time, how we get to work, how many people usually volunteer in our community. In fact, let's go and have a little look, because volunteering is really important for our community organisation. So we wanted to have a look at volunteering as an example. you can see here in the RDA, Darling Downs and Southwest area, compared to the rest of regional Queensland, in 2016, which is our last census data. Unfortunately, COVID has delayed the census and then therefore the census data. But the federal government knows that its data is a bit outdated, so it doesn't matter, we can still use this information. You can go in here and see that that in our Darling Downs and Southwest region, 23.3% of our population volunteer, which is absolutely fantastic. And you can see well above the rest of regional Queensland. So, you know, round of applause for our the strength of the volunteers in our community. So you could, maybe your project is one of those leadership strengthening community investment projects, and you might say, well, we do have and rely heavily on all of these volunteers. In fact, you can see in our region 23% of the population volunteer, but our project is really to prevent volunteer burnout. So, you know, we're going to do this to make sure that the team is strong and is going to deliver. So we need this particular leadership or team building program to make sure that the volunteers are there for us in the long term, or, you know, supplement that with you know, our volunteers are getting older and put in some of the other demographic information in here. So we will start to, FYI, get updates of the census data will start flowing through to ID Profile from March through until November. They'll start drip feeding new data through. That doesn't help us for this particular grant round, but certainly if you're applying for other different types of grants, you'll see some of that data changing. Some of the, for example, population data, ethnicity data has changed quite a bit. Like if you think about our migrant refugee community in Toowoomba, that information is quite outdated because we've had large influxes of, for example, the Yazidi community. There's now, you know, more than 2,500 of them in Toowoomba, which, you know, arrived here after 2016 in waves after 2016. So you might want to get that information from, say, Multiculturalist Australia, or from, you know, Catholic Care through TRAMS, for example, to supplement your application. But this is a really good place to start. You can slice and dice this different ways. So let's not compare ourselves to the rest of regional Queensland, but let's compare ourselves to the rest of Queensland, for example. And you can see the number of volunteers drops further. So 23.3 in our Darling Downs Southwest drops down to 18.8 across the rest of Queensland. Well, let's compare ourselves to the rest of Australia. Oh, the rest of Australia's a little bit more volunteering than just Queensland on its own. And you can see there it's gone up to 19%. So you can change the way your area, you can break it down into your different local government areas, but also down into comparing yourself against also different local government areas and geographies. The other tip that I just wanted to give you, because I'm quite a visual person, and Tim will tell you that I'm not much of a filer. If he looks at my email inbox, I like to have everything in front of me. I know some people operate like that. Some people are more organized, but I like to have it all in front of me. I'm a mind mapping kind of gal. And so if you scroll all the way down to the bottom here, here are all of those different reports spread out. So I don't need to hover over and get the hyperlink through to the different types of reports. So I can still go in through, you know, ethnicity and come up with like languages spoken at home, for example, down the bottom. And there you go. See, it's pulled up where we speak English only, non-English not stated as a percentage. And then, you know, the types of languages spoken at home there. So you can access the reports here by going, you know, hovering over, going down, having a look going down, or also have a look if you prefer this sort of format better. It kind of can also help because you can see it all at once and you go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, and then I'll go into this section, and then I might also pull up occupations, etc., etc. So that's fantastic. You can export this data as well and email it through to yourself with the little toggles up here. So please do that. Please use the graphs. They all look really pretty, and you can attach them and put them into Word documents and attach them to your grant application. So that's a bit of a surf around the community profile, where you might find demographic and sort of social impact information to feed into criterion 2. The economic information similarly is a similar sort of format. You can see there that a Darling Downs and Southwest region gross product is, you know, $22.78 billion, which represents, you know, 6.12 of the state's products. You can go through and look at employment by industry or jobs to worker ratio, who's full-time, part-time, and dig down into different industries, et cetera, et cetera. So go in here, the cost of housing, for example, might be, you know, if you're going to build some social housing or some retirement, you know, for not-for-profit retirement homes for, you know, for people, you can go in here, bring that up, et cetera, et cetera. So can I just encourage you to go in here and play around? You can't break it. I promise you, I've tried. And look at what the data is and how you might be able to utilize that and build it in the numbers into your application. There are a couple of models and calculators here that you don't have access to. Now, only Tim has got access to that. So these ID profile doesn't let the general public have access to. They need to give us a little bit more training in order to let us loose on this. So Tim can do economic impact modelling, and I'll show you what that looks like soon. And he can also do reports on event impact calculators. So if your idea is to run an event and you want to argue, well, that's going to bring X number of dollars, you know, to our town, and it's going to bring X number of visitors to our town, then this might help for you to justify and explain that in your application. So without further ado, let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Oops. And I'll show you what some of the detail that comes out of that particular report. So here we go. We've got some economic impact modelling happening here on the value of tourism and hospitality across our whole entire Darling Downs and Southwest region. And you can see there that it equates to, you know, millions and millions of dollars, and it's been growing. And you'll be able to quote these numbers in your report. Now, all of these numbers are the federal government's own numbers, okay? So they're all the modelling that's behind them, the algorithms that they use, the calculations that they use to come up with this sort of money is you can see there the source is the National Institute of Economic and Industry Research. And so the federal government uses this data themselves in their own decision making. So they're quite familiar with it. So again, you're using their own sources and their own words, which they're really comfortable with, to be able to justify your project. It then produces like a 6-page report that you might be able to attach to your document. And you can see here the you know, the numbers that it can drill down to. So you know, a particular investment of constructing something in the Maranoa region, you know, to the tune of 700,000. You can see how that's going to pan out into the local Maranoa economy. That's actually going to be worth 880,000. And then we're going to make, it's going to have a flow-on effect into the total impact into the Queensland economy of just over $1 million, $1.07 million. So, you know, that 700,000 is actually now $1 million flowing through to the economy, and it's actually a 1.38 million flowing through to the rest of the entire Australian economy. So, you know, you're going to need some steel and some cement and bits and pieces, and you know, you're spending 700,000, but you're providing economic impact, jobs and the like, and all that money is going to have a multiplier effect as it cascades through the local, region, state and federal, you know, federal Australian jurisdictions. It's going to have a flow-on effect, and you can argue some big numbers in here, particularly with construction, which is why when governments are trying to stimulate the economy, you'll find, you know, you would have seen it with COVID, you know, some of their stimulus measures are in construction. So, you know, we had a house renovation splurge there that we could access money for. So there you go. So great level and detailed reporting that you can attach to your grant application and quote some numbers. It's also got stuff broken down into industry sector. So, you know, if we're spending $700,000 building something in Maranoa, you can see there the impact of the job. So, you know, that's going to be, you know, 3 jobs, et cetera, but 4 jobs across the entire industry, because you can see here that although all the jobs initially are going to be in construction, those construction workers are going to use some stuff that's being manufactured elsewhere. So there's a couple of part-time jobs that have been created in manufacturing elsewhere. You know, they might need some, you know, accountants and architects and the like to technical services. So we're going to create a couple of hours worth of jobs in that particular area. And then those workers are going to need healthcare. So that we've got a little bit of a job, some hours there that we've created. They're going to need some groceries on the shelf. So we've created some jobs there as well. So this is how the money spent on construction can then flow through and have that multiplier effect through to the rest of the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So those reports are available, but you do need to email requests through to Tim by the 31st of January for this particular round. Tim and I are going to probably work some long hours after the 31st of January to make sure that we deliver them back to you. So get in quick, the earlier the better, and we can send that back out to you. He essentially needs, Tim actually needs a bit of a project outline in an email around your project, and then he essentially needs 2 numbers to produce, 1 or 2, preferably both numbers, to produce the reports, the economic impact reports. He needs the dollars that you expect to spend in construction and or the number of jobs that you think the construction's going to create. One or both are really good. So those are the bare minimum. Bit of a project outline and those 1 or 2 numbers, dollars of the actual construction and or number of jobs created. If you give us both numbers, we'll give you 2 reports, a jobs report and a dollars report. It's just baked up a little bit differently when he's putting those reports together. And Tim can also do an economic impact report as well. So that is only about a page and a half, but has got kind of similar, detail in it for an event, and how money spent on a particular event can then also flow through and have a multiplier effect for the community. All right, we're on the tail end of this, guys. Hang in there. There's only a couple of slides to go, I promise. So that's the data and the evidence. Numbers are your friend. Qualitative data is there. You now got a way that you can track it down. Some other considerations. The community need for the project. Make sure you argue that strongly, that you've got some great working partnerships in the community, that you understand the outputs and the outcomes, not just in the immediate, but also the long-term future, the benefits, the flow-on effects of your project. And it also helps to understand the government focus, so trying to get that strategic alignment that we talked about earlier, but also look at some of the successful past projects, because that might give you some tips and clues on the type of projects that were looked at favourably. And all of that is online. You can research that through the web pages. In summary, you need to read the guidelines, reread the guidelines. You know, they are your Bible. I know they're a bit boring. I mean, I've got them in front of me here because I'm carrying them around like my Bible at the moment. There's, you know, they're very wordy. You know, the one on the infrastructure projects stream is 38 pages in quite some detail, along with you know, 4 appendixes. But we have had, even in round 5, projects, great projects for our region that were put through, but because they didn't read the guidelines, they were immediately excluded because of eligibility. And they've put hours and hours of research and time into putting together a grant application that was never going to get across the line. So read the guidelines, reread the guidelines, write your grant application, and then read the guidelines again and go back and do a second redraft of your application, just making sure that you've covered off on some of those keywords and the flavors that they're looking for to be woven into your application. And have then someone from outside of your organization, preferably who doesn't know much about your project at all, hasn't been involved, not even another committee member or someone within your organization. Try and find someone neutral that you can trust, confidentiality, you know, ensured, but get them to read your application, because you've got to remember the assessors, I think they actually sit across in Western Australia. They know nothing about our region. They will know none of your acronyms that you might use. So have someone completely separate, divorced from the project thus far, read over your application, and chances are, if they can understand it and they understand the flow and effects, the economic and the social impacts, that the assessors have got a pretty good chance of understanding your project as well, and the arguments that you're putting forward. So it's very competitive. I'm sure it will be oversubscribed again this year. So yeah, please stick to those guidelines and make sure that the assessors will understand it. So a couple of checklists: eligibility, your grant amount, you've got the matching funds, your closing date, you're going to meet that 4 p.m. Remember, don't be tricked by the 5 p.m. on the website. It's 4 p.m. Queensland time. You've got your grant period and when you need to finish the project by, what can and can't be funded. You've got your assessment criteria, those 4 criteria, what they're looking for, how you get the data and evidence to support it, and then how to apply. And I'll talk through some of these mandatory documents now. So mandatory documents. So before I get to the mandatory documents, sorry, it's 4:40 on a Friday afternoon. I forgot this page. Read the guidelines, etc. Be succinct. Don't use acronyms. Have that second person look over, proofread, etc. Prepare early as you can. Right. Finally, let's get to our intended outcomes. So in terms of being BBRF specific, talk about jobs, economic activity, facilities, that leadership capability, community cohesion and a sense of identity. Make sure you're mentioning all the criteria, the money and the delivery. Now, the letters of support you can get from federal members, state, local, us, the local RDA, your chambers of commerce, industry bodies, community groups. If it's tourism related, tourism organisations, if it's export related, trade, Austrade, that sort of thing. So keep in mind, particularly as this is a federal government grant, that your federal member may be called upon. They may give them a ring and say, hey, David Littleproud, hey, Garth Hamilton, do you know anything about this massive, project that they want to construct? And your federal member needs to be able to kind of know, oh, yeah, I know that organisation. And yeah, they had talked to me about that. So it's not coming out of the blue, no surprises. This is absolutely a community need and it's supported at all levels of government. As I mentioned before, if you're wanting a letter of support from the RDA, make sure you get that through by the 31st of January, because we are going to get smashed. We know we are, and we'd love to get some of these out sooner rather than later and share the love. When you're asking someone for a letter of support, it helps if you're providing some data and evidence and dot points for them. But try and personalise those dot points for different letters so that it's not a pure cut and paste job. The assessors will see through that and they'll say, look, these are not authentic letters of support because it's just a cut and paste. So, you might want your federal member talking about, the need in this particular population in your community, and you'll supply them with dot points around that. Then you might want from the RDA some dot points around the economic impact, and you'll put some data and some dot points around that. And Tim will do a fantastic job of, rewording that and sending that back to you in a letter of support. And it will be, and look to the assessors as being more authentic. Some other key documents, you need to get right onto this if you haven't done it already. They'll be asking you for accountants' declarations, evidence of the contribution, so that co-funding component, if you've got other local governments, for example, stumping up the funds for you, authority to undertake the project at the sites, the landholders' approval, exemptions for matching funds. If you're going to go down that route, really going to have to argue strongly and show really good evidence. Proof of your eligible status, so for example, your ACNC number, employment numbers, evidence around your criterias, there's 4 criterias. And if your project is over $1 million, you'll need a cost benefit analysis. Now, if you look on our website, again, there's examples of all of the different accountants' declarations, evidence of contribution letters, cost benefit analysis, little templates or example letters that you can use. So you might be able to send that off with your accountant, to your accountant, to say, well, they're looking for something along these lines. Can you get that back to us? These hyperlinks and numbers are directly through to the department. So this is the horse's mouth, so to speak. If you ask us a question and we read the guidelines and go, oh, that seems a bit grey, we will ring these numbers ourselves. So these are the horse's mouth, hot off the press. If you want to hear direct, these emails and phone numbers are the people to talk to for clarification on the guidelines. And if you want some more information, we've included all of the links through to our website, which, as I mentioned, has got a lot of information on there. If you subscribe for our regular e-newsletter, we frequently send out when we hear about new grants. In fact, every week nearly, we're sending out heads up, there's a new grant out, it's called this, and our region might benefit from it. So please subscribe to that. You've got my direct email, phone number, Tim's direct email, as well as some of the quick links that we spoke about through to our funding page with all the grants on it and the ID profile information, all of your state and local government sites. We can help you. Just don't leave it too late. Send it on through before the end of January. We absolutely want our region to get our fair share of $250 million. So please let us know if we can help you in any way. We know that if that nice portion of that money comes through to our region, that it's not just about the initial construction phase or the initial leadership program. It's about the flow and effects of that. The trickle effect, the multiplier effect through our region is huge. So please, pretty please, let us know. If your idea is not ready to go quickly, then let's talk through the rest of the year. Let's arrange a time throughout the year to catch up regularly so that we can work together to strengthen your project proposal for the next round. All right, just opening the floor for questions, but before we do, Tim, has anything come up on the chat maybe that we can throw to first?
No, we've been all quiet on the chat front today.
Oh, all quiet on chat. Well, it is Friday afternoon.
You've explained things too well.
Has anybody got any questions that they might want to take themselves off mute and fire away? Anything fairly general, not project specific, but general that you'd want to ask? No. See, Tim, I'm standing between our participants and home time and the weekend, and in my case, a glass of wine. So I'm thinking that there's no questions. Last chance, everybody. No. Well, I would just like to say thank you very much for hanging in there to the very end on a Friday afternoon. Look, I really wish you all the best with putting your application together. Remember that we're here to help and that the data is your friend. Remember, here's some of the timelines and where you actually go to complete an online application form. If you're successful, you'll be advised, expected. It does take a while to sift through. It's usually expected to get the green light in late 2022. So although they say we want your project to be ready to roll in 12 weeks, well, they take a fairly long time to get back to us, sort of to the end of, nearly to the end of 2022. And even then it has to be finished by the end of 2024. So there's some timelines and where you go on to apply. And I'd just like to thank you very much for being on the call with us. Thanks for hanging in there, and please ring us if you would like to have, you know, a one-on-one session with myself, either for this round or future rounds, and we can go from there. So have a great weekend, everybody. Cheers. See you later. Bye.